So let's round up Crimson Fist week by seeing how many of their strengths we can fit in one list. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we try and get the best out of our miniatures on the tabletop. And today specifically we see how many bolter shots we can fit in a Crimson Fist list, as we have Pedro Cantor lead a devastating charge into the enemy ranks. I thought an army list would be a nice way to round off this little mini-series on Crimson Fists, to build a list that puts together a lot of their buffs and synergies together and talk about how it would actually play in a game of 40k. We'll be doing a 2000 point army list here, assuming all tournament rules and the rule of 3 are in effect. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we've organised our Crimson Fists into a battalion and a spearhead, which will give us 9 command points, though we are spending 2 before the game begins. Broadly speaking, this list consists of a bunch of gunline elements, some advancing aggressors to be a bully screen sort of unit, and a couple of deep strike hammer blows. Let's start talking about the gunline first. Here the linchpin is a bike captain with a Power Fist Storm Bolter and the Eye of Hypnoth relic, which we're buying in as an additional relic, using the stratagem to borrow a relic from the Imperial Fists for an extra command point. This guy has 8 bolter shots, which is always great when we're getting extra hits, and he'll provide rerolls of 1 for hitting and wounding with all your Crimson Fist units within 6 inches of him. If the enemy gets too close, that Power Fist will mean that he's another decent countercharge threat, and if they don't bother, then he can just blink away with those 8 bolter shots he's getting all game long, and hopefully mow down some infantry. This guy has 4 main backfield units that he can buff, and we'd think about setting him up to which ones are the most important for our given matchup. In the backfield we have 2 units of 3 eliminators with bolt sniper rifles. As bolt weapons they're certainly great for Crimson Fists, and while we're in the boosted doctrine, they'll have an extra +1 damage against tanks, which makes them into superb character hunters and actually really solid anti-tank as well, point for point. I'd be using the +1 to hit and wound power with the sergeant every turn, and those mortis rounds will make some short work of either vehicles or characters. We have a Thunderfire cannon loitering somewhere back out of line of sight with its Tech Marine gunner. Thunderfires are absolutely great for targeting units that are out of line of sight, either shredding some enemy infantry units, or if there aren't any, then we can think about just piling on some more damage to vehicles, as again the Crimson Fist's heavy weapon bonus will certainly help it out against tanks. It's always good to have the option of tremor shells in here, so if you do want to spend some command points, we could potentially slow down 2 different units from the enemy's army per turn, and hopefully keep them out of our hair until we bother to deal with them with excessive bolter fire. Thirdly, we have a unit of 5 devastated Centurions with heavy bolters and hurricane bolters. These guys are spectacular damage output in any Imperial or Crimson Fists list, and they get the best of both chapter tactics in Crimson Fists because they both ignore cover, as is native from their Omniscope, and they also can get potentially the +1 to hit against hordes, which as they're 5 models strong will come into effect every time they shoot at an enemy unit that's 10 or more. Each model puts out 18 bolter shots, so that'll be loads of extra hits with the Crimson Fist doctrine, and those heavy bolters will all be getting damage too against vehicles as well. If we want to pulverise a vehicle, then we can pop the Tank Hunter stratagem for 2 command points, which should pretty much make a nasty mess of virtually any vehicle in the game. All of those bolter shots are absolutely amazing at thinning out any advancing hordes. With these guys, I'd want to be hiding them out of line of sight behind a ruin turn 1 ideally, safe from enemy fire, so in my turn 1 they can step out and start mowing down anyone they want to. These would certainly be a high priority for getting in range of the big buff captain, as their damage output is so high. If they do become a priority target and their unit I absolutely want to survive, we could certainly think about bolstered positions. It's only 1 command point, and if they're in a good position for shooting that they won't need to move from, making them have a 2-up save with +2 to that save is going to keep them safe from virtually any firepower. They are quite vulnerable to being tagged in close combat, however, if something does manage to survive the overwatch, or charges from out of line of sight, so we need to screen them well, and that's where the next element of the list comes in. In front of all of these backfield units, we'll have 3 units of 3 aggressors with bolters and frag storms. These guys will be pushing forwards towards the front of the deployment zone. They're quite hard to remove, being high toughness multi-wound models, and they put out a phenomenal amount of firepower even if they don't get to fire twice with their aggressor special rule. With Crimson Fists, you'll add an extra 25% hits to that from their extra bolter hits on 6, and being only units of 3, they might easily get the +1 to hit benefit against hordes, meaning that these guys could chew through hordes like no tomorrow. Their melee is certainly not to be underestimated either, and just having these as a threat means that the opponent can't afford to put fragile units too close to the front line unless they're happy with them being smashed to bits by power fists. Next up we have 3 sets of Stalker Bolt Rifle Intercessors. These guys tick all the Crimson Fist boxes. They're bolters for those extra hits, they're heavy weapons for that extra damage, and they're small units, meaning that they could have the +1 to hit against hordes if you need to thin out some more infantry. These guys are probably the next layer of screening. We'll put them before the other backfield units. They can either contribute to long-range firepower with those 36-inch range Stalker Bolt Rifles, and if the enemy gets too close, particularly infantry, they're certainly not averse to charging into close combat to break some heads. They also fill out our battalion, giving us access to those all-important command points. We have one more model that will usually start on the board, which is our Warlord. He's a jump pack chaplain who's chosen to take a power fist instead of his bolt pistol, and that power fist has been upgraded to the Fist of Vengeance, the unique Crimson Fist power fist with damage 3 and no -1 to hit penalty, which essentially makes it a better Thunderhammer that costs only 9 points. We'll be taking the Warlord trait Imperium Sword on him, which will give him +1 attack and +1 strength, so it will usually be strength 9, 5 attacks on the first round of close combat, though it would certainly be viable to swap this out for the Crimson Fist unique trait, which gives you +D3 attacks if there's 5 or more enemy models within 6 inches. I feel the Imperium Sword's just a little bit more reliable as it goes off every time on the charge, rather than just against certain armies, but there's certainly nothing wrong with the Crimson Fist trait for this guy. We're paying 1 more command point for him to be a Master of Sanctity, meaning that he can recite 2 litanies, and those 2 litanies will be the +2 to charge, and Mantra of Strength, which gives him +1 strength, +1 attack, and +1 damage. Just in case you're counting, this is 6 attacks hitting on 2s, now at strength 10 with damage 4. So this guy is going to make an absolute mess of whatever he can reach. At the start of the game, he'll be advancing fairly centrally behind the aggressors, potentially buffing them with the +2 to charge, or potentially even his Litany of Hate to make them reroll hits in close combat, which is great with those power fists, as well as obviously being a massive melee threat himself. But his secondary purpose is to jump out to meet the deep striking elements of our force, and specifically give the Terminators +2 to charge, meaning they should make their initial charge out of deep strike. So let's go on to the assault element now. In that we have Pedro Cantor, 8 Tartarus Terminators with chain fists, and a drop pod full of Grav Devastators. Pedro and the Grav Devastators ride in the drop pod. His full rerolls to hit mean that they'll be hitting 3 out of every 4 shots, even after they've counted as moving from disembarking from the drop pod. The Devastators will pop the Gravitic Amplification stratagem, which will give them 4 rerolls to wound and reroll damage for their Grav cannons. So they'll have 4 rerolls to hit, wound and damage, and also +1 damage for being in the Crimson Fist Devastator doctrine. This means that every wound that gets through will be averaging over 3 damage, and the Grav Devs throw out 20 shots turn 1 with that cherub, and they all have 4 rerolls. You could also soup this up with the Tank Hunter stratagem as well, if it was absolutely make or break whether you kill one massive target from their drop. I wouldn't be expecting these guys to survive the first turn's retaliation, as they're not very tough, but between all of these buffs there's a very good chance that they'll have killed something that's important enough to justify their existence already. As we've said, Pedro Cantor himself is also in that pod. He's there to firstly provide the full rerolls to the Grav Devastators, but also to provide full rerolls to the Tartarus Terminators who will be dropping alongside. He can also give them +1 attack in the combat phase, which is just added bonus. The idea is that Pedro and the Grav Devs get out of the drop pod next to the Terminators. Pedro buffs both, the Grav Devs kill something behind the front line at 24-inch range, and the Terminators make a nasty mess of whatever's on the front line, after unloading 8 Stormbolters with full Chapter Master rerolls into some chaff. If we've managed to coordinate it right, hopefully the Chaplain will have jumped up to give them the +2 to charge, which hopefully Pedro and the Terminators will both be able to make good use of. When the Terminators are in combat, we'll certainly be looking for any opportunities to wrap and trap an enemy unit, and prevent them falling back and thus preventing the Terminators being shot. Pedro also packs a massive punch in melee, with 7 attacks on the charge from that power fist, so it's likely whatever's on the front line is probably going to be dead between him and the squad. So overall I'm quite pleased with this list. We've got absolutely tons of bolt fire, decent anti-tank both in ranged and in melee, and a couple of absolutely devastating punches between the Centurions, Terminators and Grav Devs. We've got 3 fighty characters, decent sniper fire, some out of line of sight shooting, and lots of shots for dealing with hordes, which is the Crimson Fist speciality after all. I honestly think that this list would be quite a pain to deal with for most armies, as there are a lot of threats that need to be neutralised. Probably the worst matchup would be something with heavy armour and a ton of screening units to chew through, that could outrange the Grav Devs and all the power fists that we'd be wanting to get into close combat with. It's become very much a game of how much chaff can we kill with the aggressors, and Centurions to be able to get the shorter ranged anti-tank in range of heavy armour. Possibly multiple flyer lists could also pose a bit of a threat, being able to outrange a lot of the slightly slow moving units that we have on the board. Anyway, I think that this will be a fun list to play. If anyone has any CNC on the list, or if I've made any errors, please let me know. Or if anyone has any insights on any of the units that we've talked about, that would also be great. It's been really fun covering the Crimson Fists. I'll certainly look to do so in the future again, if any other video ideas present themselves. So go forth and defend Rin's world against the Green Tide, and subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to hear other videos like this. Thanks very much for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.